Greetings, legal minds and lawyers in equity. Today, we won't be analyzing a legal concept. Nevertheless, we will try to analyze and examine something very important in relation to your studies as aspirants to the Nigerian legal profession. We will briefly examine and guide you on how to answer law problem questions as a law student studying in any institution in Nigeria. As law students, when it comes to answering exam questions, your success during the course of your study is hinged and should be determined by two major factors. The first is your ability to read, understand, and comprehend what you've read. The second is your ability to put into writing things you've read. So while we already understood the concept of reading, comprehending, and understanding, many law students encounter so many difficulties when it comes to trying to put into writing the various things they've read and understood. Having the ability to answer law questions as a law student is very important when determining the success of your grades, because what determines your grades in respect to an exam is not just your ability to read, understand, and comprehend, but also having the ability and skill to put into writing what you've read. Because it is one thing to read and understand, it is also another thing to put into writing what you've read and properly understood. When you approach legal exams as a law student, there are two kinds of questions you should and you must encounter. The first are known as the essay questions, which are always straightforward in nature. And the second are known as the law problem questions. They can also term it the scenario questions. When it comes to the essay question, you should already understand the various rules and procedures that should be followed when trying to attempt an essay question, which, like I already said, is straightforward in nature. But the problem question, which is a scenario question, is very important, as you should and you must understand the various rules and procedures that you should follow when attempting a scenario question or a problem question. When answering a problem question, there are certain rules that must be followed, because when you read certain legal documents like brief of argument, the judgment of a particular court, or so many other legal documents, you will find out that a particular structure is being used in the construction of this legal document. These procedures are known as the relevant rules and procedures for answering a law problem question. There are 4 rules, there are 4 procedures, there are 4 steps that must be followed when you are about to answer a scenario question. This is known as the IRAC or the IPAC method of answering law problem questions. It is being called an IRAC or an IPAC method so that beginners in law would properly understand the content of the various rules for answering this question. IRAC or IPAC simply means issues, rules or principles, application and conclusion. Issues, rules or principles, application and conclusion. Firstly, before you answer a question, that question must be asked. This is to say that before you can properly attempt a problem question, you must first understand the major area of conflict that you are expected to determine. So when it comes to the first part of answering a problem question, which is the issue, it refers to the fact that before you attempt this problem question, before you take out the relevant rules and principles that you would use in determining the nature and the position of the law in respect to that conflict, you must first have the ability to determine the issues in that particular dispute. When you are determining the issue, you are simply identifying the major area of conflict between parties. You are taking out the situations where there is a major disagreement between the 2 or more parties involved in that scenario question. During the course of your identification of the relevant issues in a particular legal exam question, you should understand that you must see 2 different kinds of issues. The first one is the issue of fact, which involves the major disagreement between the parties, or the issue of law, which is the disagreement between parties as to the application of a particular provision of an enacted law. Having said that, you should also understand in your identification of issues that your issue, after it is being identified, should always come in form of a question, because as we said earlier, before a question can be answered, it must first be asked. So before you can take out the relevant principles you would use in answering this question, you must have outlined the relevant issues that you have to determine. So when you check out some legal documents, it is also called an issue for determination, because literally you are determining the issues. So your issue, after it must have been identified, should come in form of a question, and this is always seen in the legal term whether or not. So when we say whether or not, we are simply trying to lay out a particular sentence which during the course of your answering the question you would determine by virtue of the relevant principles you are going to use to answer that particular question. Coming to the rules or principles. After you have identified the issues, you should ask yourself, based on your knowledge of the general position of Nigerian law, that what are the general rules or principles that can be applied in your determination of this particular issue to which you've identified. So when I face a particular legal question involving the supremacy of the Constitution, or a particular legal question where a specific law is inconsistent with the general provisions of the Constitution, this issue involves the supremacy of the Constitution. Now, in my determination of this issue, I need to ask myself, what are the general rules or principles that must be applied to these issues to which I have successfully identified? It is in that place that I would now begin to cite the relevant provisions of the Constitution, which gives us an exposition on what the concept of the supremacy of the Constitution entails. So the rules and principles just simply refers to the general provisions of the law or general principles which should be used in your determination of the legal issues to which you've identified. Now, we've discussed the issues and we've discussed the rules or principles. The next is the application of these relevant rules and principles to which you've properly identified during the course of your explanation. Like we said when we were explaining this during the course of the commencement of this lecture, we said that a problem question is a scenario question. That means a problem question is not a kind of question that just wants you to explain a particular legal principle. Rather, it brings to your notice a particular scenario, and all it wants you to do is to take out the relevant rules and principles which will be used in determining the issues to which you've identified. We've talked about your identification of the relevant issues in respect to the particular scenario. We've also talked about the rules and principles you are using for these issues. The application simply consists of the application of these rules you've properly established to the issues you've identified in respect to the scenario question. So when we talk about the rules or principles, you were simply given an establishment of the general rules and principles you would use to identify those issues. But in your application, you are using the already established rules and principles to identify the issues in respect to the scenario question. We've talked about the issues, we've talked about the rules, we've talked about the application, and now coming to the conclusion. What are you to do while concluding your answer to this question? It is important to note that every scenario question always comes with a responsibility on you, the person who is answering the question. That means every lecturer who sets a particular scenario question always asks you as a law student or a practicing lawyer to do something in respect to that particular question. Most times we are always asked to advise the parties. Most times we are asked to advise only one party. And sometimes we are always asked to determine the success or failure of the suit. In your attempt to perform the obligation that has been placed upon you in that question is what you are going to do during the course of your concluding the answer to the question. What are you going to do in the conclusion? When you are asked to advise a particular party in the scenario question, after you have identified the issues, you have established the rules and principles in respect to that scenario question, you apply these already established rules to the issues you are determining, your conclusion is simply telling the parties what to do. Because as a lawyer, one of the major duties you have to do is to advise your clients. Because when a client comes with a particular legal problem, after you have properly giving the client the relevant provisions of Nigerian law in respect to that problem he has brought to your office, you must advise him on what to do. So, your conclusion in every legal problem question can always come in form of an advice or a direction. But this advice and direction, which are the content of your conclusion, should be on the basis of the general rules and principles you've established. So you can start by saying that from the aforementioned provisions of the relevant law that you've established during the course of your rules and application, this is what this party in this particular suit or this particular scenario question is expected to do. So when it comes to answering a legal problem question, you must first identify the issues. You establish the relevant rules and principles that will be used in your determination of that issue which you've identified. You would apply these already established rules and principles to the issues you've identified. And then you conclude by directing the parties on what to do or advising the client on what to do in respect to your already established rules and principles. If you can properly understand these various procedures for answering law problem questions, then you are halfway to succeeding in every exam questions you attempt to answer. There is a comprehensive note and article on this. You send us a private message to get a comprehensive note on the modes and procedures that should be followed when answering a problem question as a Nigerian law student. Thank you so much for your time. Do follow us and subscribe to this channel to be updated when more insightful knowledge and legal tips are sent.